The grand hall of the alien palace shimmered with golden light, but the air inside was heavy like chains pressing down on every breath. Hundreds of alien nobles stood in silence, their tall frames covered in shining robes, their glowing eyes fixed on the throne at the center. Upon that throne sat the alien queen, her crown made of living crystals that pulsed with a faint light. She was beautiful but terrifying, her expression colder than ice, her voice sharper than steel. For generations, no one dared to question her power. Before her lay a table carved from black stone, and on that table sat a single sheet, a reproductive contract. It was more than paper. It was law, tradition, and chains that had bound countless males of her kind. Any who signed became hers, body and future claimed by the queen and her bloodline. No one had ever refused. No one had ever dared, but today was different. At the center of the hall stood a human. His figure looked small compared to the towering aliens around him. His clothes were plain. He carried no weapon, no armor, and yet his eyes held something the aliens could not name. He stared at the contract, then at the queen herself, unblinking. "Human," the queen's voice echoed, filling every corner of the chamber. "You will sign this contract. You will serve. You will obey. And in return you will be given a place in history among my chosen." The crowd hissed with anticipation. Some sneered. Others laughed softly. To them it was only a matter of time before the human bent his head and submitted. That was the way of things. That was the law, but the human did not move. His silence stretched, and with every second the nobles shifted uncomfortably. Something about him felt wrong, dangerous. Finally he spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried like thunder. "I don't sign chains." A wave of shock rippled through the crowd. No one could believe what they had heard. The queen's eyes narrowed, her lips tightening. "You dare refuse me?" she said slowly, her words dripping with venom. The human stepped closer to the table. His hand rested lightly on the contract. Every guard in the hall raised their weapon, ready to strike at the slightest command. The nobles leaned forward, waiting to see blood spill. Then, with a sudden motion, the human tore the contract in two. The sound of paper ripping was small, almost soft, yet it thundered louder than war drums. The shredded pieces fell to the floor like broken chains, and the entire hall froze in disbelief. Gasps echoed. A few nobles cried out in outrage. Others stepped back in fear, as if the very act of tearing the contract might call down doom upon them all. The queen rose slowly from her throne. Her aura flared, a wave of raw power filling the chamber. Her eyes burned with golden fire as she stared down at the human. For centuries, no male, alien or otherwise, had dared such defiance. "Do you know what you have done?" she whispered, her voice trembling between fury and disbelief. The human looked up at her, steady, unshaken. "I did what no one else here would do. I chose to be free." The queen's hands tightened on the arms of her throne. Rage boiled inside her, but something else stirred as well. For the first time in her long reign, she felt uncertain. This human did not cower. He did not beg. He did not fear death. He stood before her as if her throne meant nothing. The silence broke when one of the nobles shouted, "Kill him!" Another cried, "Tear him apart!" The chamber filled with angry voices demanding the human's blood. Guards pressed forward, their blades humming with deadly energy. But the queen raised her hand, and instantly all fell silent. Her eyes never left the human. She studied him as though he were not flesh, but a puzzle she could not solve. He had broken her law, insulted her throne, humiliated her before her court. By every rule of her kingdom, he deserved death. And yet, killing him felt too simple, too easy. "No," she said softly, her voice cutting through the hall like a blade. "He will not die. He will prove himself." The nobles gasped again, this time in confusion. Prove himself? What did that mean? The queen leaned forward, her gaze like fire. "You think yourself free, human? You think you can defy me? Then you will face the trial of chains. If you survive, you will walk away as you wish. But if you fail, your blood will soak this hall and your defiance will end here." The human did not flinch. He did not even blink. Instead, he gave the faintest smile. "Then let's see your trial." The queen's crystal crown pulsed brighter, as if sensing the storm about to come. The hall shook with whispers, fear, and excitement. The contract lay shredded on the floor, forgotten, but its meaning was not lost. This was no longer about law. This was no longer about tradition. This was the beginning of something dangerous, something the galaxy had never seen before. And as the human stood calmly in the center of the hall, Everyone watching felt the same chilling truth. The chains had been broken, and nothing would ever be the same again. The echo of the shredded contract still haunted the grand hall. Pieces of it lay scattered across the floor, glowing faintly as if even the ink mourned its destruction. The nobles had not stopped murmuring since the act, their voices a mix of fear, anger, and awe. For them, the contract had been unbreakable, eternal, yet one human had torn it like it was nothing more than a dead leaf in the wind. The alien queen sat rigid on her throne, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly that the crystal embedded there began to crack. The silence of her court was heavy, waiting for her word. For centuries, her command had been law. Her slightest frown could end lives. Now, before all her people, her authority had been challenged, mocked, and shattered in a single act. She stood. Her long robe fell around her like flowing fire, and her crown pulsed with a furious light. The nobles bowed their heads at once, afraid to meet her blazing eyes. She raised her hand slowly, and her voice rolled across the chamber like thunder. "Seize him." The guards, massive warriors clad in bone-forged armor, stepped forward with weapons raised. The sound of their boots hitting the polished stone floor echoed like war drums. Every step carried the weight of the queen's anger. They expected the human to panic, to fall to his knees, to beg for mercy. But he didn't move. He stood in the center of the hall with his shoulders relaxed, his gaze locked on the queen. His calmness was more terrifying than any weapon. Even as the guards surrounded him, he didn't flinch. His hands were empty, yet his presence made the nobles shift uneasily, as if he carried a weapon stronger than steel. One guard raised his blade, its edge glowing with energy. He was about to strike when the queen spoke again. "Stop." The word froze them mid-step. Confusion rippled among the guards. The nobles looked up in shock. The queen's eyes narrowed as she studied the human. Her fury burned hotter with every passing second. But deep inside, a seed of curiosity rooted itself. What made this fragile creature so bold? What fire lived in him that even her throne could not extinguish? "You insult me before my court," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You tear the contract that has bound males for centuries. Do you think yourself above my law?" The human tilted his head slightly, his eyes steady. "I think your law has no power over me." Gasps filled the room. Some nobles staggered back as if his words themselves carried fire. Others hissed in fury, shouting for his death. "Blasphemy!" one cried. "He mocks our queen?" shouted another. The voices grew louder, a storm of outrage threatening to shake the very palace walls. Yet through it all, the queen stood still, her gaze fixed on the man who dared to stand against her. "Kill him, my queen," a noble cried, falling to his knees. "Make him an example." "Yes," another shouted. "Show the galaxy what happens to those who defy you." The queen's jaw clenched. Every part of her long reign demanded she strike him down. That was how she ruled, with fear, with chains, with punishment swift and merciless. And yet she hesitated. Why? Her anger roared inside her, but so did something else, something dangerous, a whisper in her mind that she could not silence. "If I kill him now, I will never know what makes him different. I will never know why I hesitated." She raised her hand once more, and the hall fell silent instantly. Even the guards froze in place, their blades trembling in the air. "No," she said at last, her voice low but sharp. "His blood will not stain this floor." Not yet, the nobles cried out in shock. Some fell silent in fear, while others shouted in protest. But none dared to stand against her word. The queen descended from her throne, each step echoing through the hall. The guards moved aside as she approached the human. She stopped only a few steps away, her towering frame casting a shadow over him. Still, he did not move back. He stood as if her shadow had no weight. She looked into his eyes, searching for fear. There was none. "Only fire. You believe yourself free?" she whispered. "Then you will prove it. Not with words, with survival." The hall trembled at her words. Every noble knew what she meant. The trial of chains, a test older than her throne, created to break the will of any who thought themselves above the queen's law. No one had ever walked out alive. The queen's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Tomorrow you will enter the trial. If you survive, you may walk away. But if you fail, your bones will be buried in the earth beneath my palace." The human finally moved. He gave a small shrug, as if her words were nothing more than idle threats. His voice was calm, steady, and sharp. "Then I'll see you tomorrow." For the first time in centuries, the queen felt her heart falter. His words should have meant nothing. Yet they lingered in her chest like a spark waiting to ignite. She turned away quickly, hiding the storm inside her. To the nobles, she was still the unshaken ruler, the eternal queen. But deep down, she knew the truth. This human was different. He had torn her contract. He had torn her pride. And if he survived the trial, he might tear down even more. The queen raised her hand again, signaling the end of the gathering. The nobles bowed deeply, though whispers of fear and doubt filled their throats. The guards led the human away to prepare for his trial, but even as he disappeared from the hall, his presence remained like a shadow. The queen returned to her throne, sitting in silence as the last of the nobles left. Alone, she let her mask slip for a single moment. Her fingers trembled against the crystal armrest. Her heart raced. For the first time in her reign, she felt something she had never known before. Doubt. And beneath that doubt, hidden and silent, a flicker of something even more dangerous: curiosity. The palace grounds shifted under the light of two moons. Night had fallen, and with it came a silence so heavy that even the insects of the alien world dared not sing. Beyond the gates of the throne hall stretched the Trial of Chains, a labyrinth of ancient stone, traps and creatures bred only for death. Few had seen its full length. None had survived. The nobles filled the viewing balconies, eager to witness the human's end. Their whispers carried venom and delight. They wanted his blood spilled across the sand, his broken body proof that no one could tear a contract and live. The queen sat high above them, her throne moved to overlook the trial grounds. Her crown shimmered in the moonlight, her face carved of ice. Yet deep inside she felt the storm of her own emotions. The gates opened. The human stepped into the arena. No weapon, no shield. His plain clothes clung to him, torn slightly from the guards who had dragged him here. He walked slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat. There was no fear in his face, no tremor in his hands, only calm. The queen narrowed her eyes. How could he walk into death so easily? Did he not understand what awaited him? Or did he simply not care? A horn sounded. The trial began, the ground shifted. From beneath the sand, chains rose like living snakes snapping shut in the air. They were forged from black iron, moving as if alive, hunting for flesh to bind. The first chain lashed at the human, striking fast as lightning. He dodged, stepping aside with ease. The second chain whipped toward his neck, but he ducked low, rolling across the ground. The crowd gasped. He was not strong, not armored, not even trained in their ways, but he was fast. He moved with a strange rhythm, not fighting the chains head-on but flowing around them, letting their weight and speed work against themselves. The queen leaned forward slightly, her lips parting. The chains twisted around one another, tightening like serpents. The human paused, watching. Then he stepped forward, and with quick, sharp movements he looped one chain around another. The iron links screeched as they tangled together, pulling themselves into a knot. With a final jerk, the two chains locked into each other, trapped by their own strength. The crowd erupted in cries of shock. No one had ever thought to fight the chains with their own movement. The human stood tall, dust on his face, a faint smile tugging at his lips. His eyes lifted to the balcony where the queen sat. Their gazes met. He gave the smallest nod, as though daring her to send more. The queen's chest tightened. She raised her hand. The ground trembled again. This time the walls of the labyrinth shifted, opening new paths. From the darkness emerged the beast of the trial, a hulking creature with 4 arms, its skin plated like stone, its mouth filled with jagged teeth. Its roar shook the arena. The nobles cheered. The queen kept her face still, though inside her heart pounded. The human did not back away. He crouched slightly, his eyes sharp, studying the beast as though it were a puzzle. The creature charged, its steps shaking the ground. It swung one massive arm down. Dust exploded where its fist struck. But the human was gone, sliding to the side in the nick of time. The crowd leaned forward, their hearts racing. The beast roared again, swinging wildly. But each time the human moved just enough, never wasting energy, never panicking. He was not stronger. He was not faster. But he was smarter. He grabbed a broken piece of chain from the ground. It wasn't a weapon, but in his hands it became one. He darted close, wrapping the chain around the beast's arm. The creature swung, but the chain pulled tight, dragging its own arm across its chest. The beast stumbled, confused. The human didn't strike. He didn't need to. He used the beast's own rage against it, moving faster than its thoughts. binding it with nothing more than its strength and his timing. Finally, with one last roar, the beast collapsed, the chain digging into its throat. It thrashed, then went still. Dust filled the air. Silence fell. The nobles were stunned. They had expected blood, but instead they saw cunning. They had expected fear, but instead they saw calm. The human stood alone, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He dropped the chain to the ground and looked up again at the queen. This time there was no smile. His expression was serious, almost sharp, as though he were the one judging her. The queen's fingers tightened on her throne. Her fury burned hotter, but so did something she hated to admit: respect. He had beaten the chains. He had beaten the beast, and he had done it not with brute force but with cleverness, patience, and refusal to bow. The trial was not yet over. There were more traps, more horrors waiting in the labyrinth. Yet already, the human had done the impossible. He had made the nobles whisper. He had made the queen hesitate. And as the two moons shone down on the arena, the alien queen realized a dangerous truth. This human was not breaking her laws by accident. He was tearing down her world piece by piece. And he hadn't even drawn blood yet. For the first time, she wondered if her fury alone would be enough to stop him. The labyrinth had swallowed many warriors before, but never had it been this quiet. The nobles lining the balconies leaned forward, their glowing eyes fixed on the lone human moving through the maze of shifting stone. The creature he had faced lay motionless behind him, its body tangled in the very chains meant to kill him. But the trial was far from finished. The queen knew this. Every noble knew this. And yet there was a heavy unease spreading through the crowd. He was supposed to fail. The human walked with slow, deliberate steps, scanning the walls as they twisted and shifted, closing one path and opening another. He touched nothing without thinking, observed every shadow, every sound. Unlike the alien males before him, he didn't throw himself against the traps in desperation. He waited, he listened. He adapted. The queen watched from above, her fingers digging into the armrests of her throne. Rage burned in her chest. Rage that he had survived so far. Rage that her court whispered in awe of him. Rage that she herself could not look away. Each breath of his defiance chipped at the foundations of her rule. The ground shook. From the sand, spikes shot upward like the teeth of a giant beast. They rose in unpredictable patterns, stabbing at the air, closing the path ahead. Nobles gasped. Some smiled cruelly, certain that this would finally be the end. The human paused, eyes narrowing as the spikes continued their deadly rhythm. He did not rush forward blindly. Instead, he crouched, studying the rhythm of the spikes as they rose and fell. He picked up a piece of broken stone and tossed it forward. The spikes pierced it instantly, shattering it to dust. He nodded slightly to himself, then moved. The nobles held their breath as he stepped into the trap. His movements were sharp, precise like a dance. Each step was timed perfectly, each pause calculated. Spikes missed him by the width of a hair, stabbing the air where his body had been moments before. He never wasted energy, never looked panicked. To the watching crowd, it seemed impossible. He moved as though he could see the future. When he reached the other side, the nobles erupted in cries of disbelief. Some shouted in anger, demanding the queen end the trial and execute him anyway. Others stared in silence, fear growing in their throats. The queen said nothing. Her heart hammered inside her chest. Her trial of chains, designed to break every male spirit, was failing. Not because he was stronger, but because he thought differently. He was turning her weapons against themselves, bending her laws until they shattered. She rose from her throne, her voice echoing through the arena. "You think this proves anything, human? You think you are free because you dodge my chains and beasts? No. Freedom is an illusion, and soon you will understand that." The human looked up at her, sweat glistening on his brow, his chest rising and falling with calm breaths. His voice was steady, sharp, unshaken. "Freedom isn't given. It's taken, and I'll take it with or without your blessing." Gasps echoed from the balconies. Even the guards stiffened, their grips tightening on their weapons. The human's words struck deeper than his survival. They were fire, and the court was dry kindling. The queen's anger finally broke. Her crown flared with golden light, sending sparks of energy into the air. She raised her hand high, and the ground trembled violently. The walls of the labyrinth groaned and split, opening to reveal the final stage of the trial. A pit yawned wide, filled with molten fire. From its depths rose the true guardian of the trial of chains, a colossal creature of living metal, forged in fire, its body wrapped in burning chains. Its roar shook the stones, flames pouring from its maw. The nobles cheered wildly, their fear turning to bloodlust. "Burn him! Tear him apart!" they cried. The human stepped back, shielding his face from the heat. His eyes flicked across the creature, studying the glowing chains that bound it. His mind worked quickly, calculating. To the nobles, he looked small and fragile before the beast. But the queen saw something else: calm, focus, refusal. The creature struck, swinging its burning chains in a deadly arc. The human dove aside, rolling across the scorching stone. His sleeve caught fire and he ripped it off without hesitation. Another chain lashed down, but he ducked, letting it smash the ground where he had stood. He grabbed a length of broken chain from the ground, wrapping it around his hands. His eyes locked onto the creature's movements. Each swing, each step was wild but predictable. He waited for the right moment. When the beast swung both arms in rage, the human sprinted forward closer than anyone dared. He ducked under the first burning chain, leapt past the second, and looped his own chain around the beast's leg. With a quick twist, he pulled, forcing the monster to stumble. The nobles roared in disbelief. The queen gritted her teeth, unable to tear her gaze away. The human climbed onto the beast's back, dodging the flames that shot from its maw. He wrapped the chain tighter, pulling against the creature's own strength. The monster thrashed violently, its roar echoing into the night, but the more it struggled, the tighter it bound itself. Finally, with a crash that shook the labyrinth, the creature collapsed, its burning chains snapping against the stone. The fire sputtered and the beast lay still. The human stood on its back, chest heaving, eyes glowing with the firelight. He looked up at the queen again, his voice carrying through the silent arena. "Your chains don't break me. They break themselves." The nobles were speechless. Fear spread through the crowd like a shadow. For the first time, the queen's trial had not crushed a challenger. It had been defeated. The queen's heart pounded. Fury raged inside her, but beneath it burned something far more dangerous. The knowledge that her rule, her laws, her very power had reached a breaking point, and the human had pushed it there. The smoke from the fallen beast still lingered in the labyrinth, curling into the night air like the last breath of a dying titan. The nobles were silent now. Their voices, once filled with laughter and certainty, had dried into whispers of fear. No one knew how to react. No one had ever survived this far. No one had ever turned the trial of chains into a mockery. Yet the human stood tall, his body covered in soot, his chest rising and falling with steady, unbroken breaths. Above them, the alien queen sat rigid on her throne. Her crown pulsed with dim golden light reflecting the fire below, her jaw clenched tight, her nails cutting into the crystal armrests. She had created this trial to crush willpower, to shatter pride, to remind every soul in her empire that resistance was futile. But this fragile creature from another world had walked through every trap, every beast, and stood alive. More than alive, defiant. Her court was shifting, and she could feel it. The nobles who once looked at her with unshakable loyalty were now stealing glances at the human. They had seen something tonight that they could not unsee. A being who did not bow, who did not fear, who survived not because of her laws but in spite of them. The queen rose. Her robes flowed around her like molten fire, her presence demanding silence. She raised her hand and the gates of the labyrinth opened. The human walked out slowly, his eyes still sharp, meeting hers as if she were no higher than him. The guard stepped forward instantly, weapons drawn, eager to end him now that the trial was complete. But the queen raised her palm. "Enough!" Her voice cut through the night, sharp and cold. The guards froze. The nobles bowed. The human stopped only a few steps away, standing in the open space below her throne. He looked up at her without kneeling, without lowering his eyes. The queen's heart beat faster than it should. For centuries she had commanded obedience without question, yet now before her stood someone who refused to bend, and it shook her more than she wanted to admit. She spoke slowly, carefully, her voice carrying through the court. "You have survived my trial. No male, no warrior, no challenger has ever done so. You should not be standing here, and yet, here you are." The nobles murmured, some bowing their heads deeper, others trembling with rage at her words. "You tore my contract," she continued. "You humiliated my court. You defied me in front of my people. By law, by tradition, your life belongs to me." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "And yet I cannot kill you. Not after what you have done." Gasps erupted from the balconies. A few nobles shouted in protest. "My queen, he must die," one cried. "He is a danger to us all," another yelled. But the queen silenced them with a single glare. Her eyes burned with fire as she looked back down at the human. "Why?" she demanded suddenly, her voice sharp. "Why tear the contract? Why stand against me when every other creature bows? What are you, human?" The hall went silent. Every noble leaned forward, waiting for his words. The human's answer came without hesitation. His voice was calm, steady, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Because no one owns a human. Not you, not your law, not your throne. Freedom isn't something you give, it's something we take. And I will never trade mine for a piece of paper." The nobles erupted in chaos, shouting, cursing, calling him a heretic, a fool, a threat. The queen lifted her hand again and silence fell instantly. Her heart raced, but she kept her face cold. His words rang inside her head. No one owns a human. For centuries she had believed that power meant control, that chains were the only way to keep order. But now, standing before her, was proof of another truth, a truth she could not ignore no matter how much she wanted to. She turned to her nobles, her voice sharp and commanding. "He has survived the trial of chains. By our oldest laws he is free. None may touch him." The nobles roared in protest. Some dropped to their knees in fury. Others turned pale with fear. But none dared to defy her directly. The human gave a small nod as if he had expected nothing less. His eyes never left hers, steady, unshaken. The queen sat back slowly, her hands trembling ever so slightly on her throne. To her court, she was still their unbreakable ruler, but deep inside she knew something had changed. This was no longer about a contract, no longer about tradition. This was about her choice. She could cling to her laws and kill him, silencing the whisper of doubt he had planted in her people's hearts. Or she could let him live and face the storm that would follow, a storm that might shatter her throne. Her crown pulsed once more, bright and sharp as if urging her to decide. The queen took a deep breath, her voice steady as she declared, "The human lives, and he will leave this place as he chooses." The chamber exploded in chaos. The nobles screamed in rage, some collapsing in despair, others whispering of rebellion. But the human only stood there calm, his eyes locked with hers. And in that moment the queen realized something terrifying. She had not spared him out of mercy. She had spared him because she wanted to see what he would do next, and that meant she had already lost a piece of her throne. The queen's declaration still echoed across the great hall. "The human lives, and he will leave this place as he chooses." The words clung to the stone walls like a haunting, impossible dream. No one could believe what they had just heard. The trial of chains had always ended in death, yet here stood a human, alive and free, while the alien queen herself had lowered her judgment. The nobles were in chaos. Some shouted that the queen had gone soft, others muttered that it was a trick while a few remained silent, their eyes filled with something more dangerous than outrage, doubt. For the first time in centuries they were questioning her, and it was all because of him. The human stood still, calm in the storm of voices around him. His gaze never shifted from the queen, even as the crowd trembled with fury. His silence spoke louder than their shouts. It was as if he was daring them to try and take back her words, daring them to step forward and test him. None did. The queen sat tall upon her throne, her face as cold as stone. But inside her heart burned with fire. Rage, confusion, and something else she dared not name twisted inside her. She had ruled with fear all her life, yet now her own court whispered openly. She could feel their eyes on her crown, their hunger for her throne. When the hall finally cleared, she called for her council. 12 elders entered the chamber, their faces drawn with concern. They bowed, though not as deeply as they once did. She noticed it. She hated that she noticed it. One spoke first, his voice low but sharp. "My queen, this is madness. The human should have been executed. By sparing him, you weaken yourself. The nobles will not forgive this." Another added. Already whispers spread beyond the palace. Word of his defiance will travel across the empire. Others may rise, emboldened by his example. The queen's jaw tightened. She had thought of this already. "He survived the trial," she said coldly. "By our oldest law, that makes him free. To kill him now would make me a liar. Better to be a liar than a weak queen," one elder hissed before catching himself, lowering his head quickly. The chamber grew heavy with silence. The queen's hands clenched at her sides, sparks of golden light flickering from her crown. Never before had her council dared speak so boldly. Never before had she felt their loyalty slip through her fingers like sand. She dismissed them with a wave, her voice sharp as a blade. "Leave me." When they were gone, she sat in silence, her thoughts tangled. The human's words echoed in her mind. No one owns a human. They had been spoken with such certainty, such conviction, that even she could not dismiss them. She had ruled for so long with chains and contracts, with fear and submission. But this fragile outsider had survived her deadliest trial, and spoken as if freedom itself was a weapon sharper than any blade. And worse, she felt curiosity gnawing at her. Far across the palace, in a chamber guarded by steel doors, the human sat quietly. They had not imprisoned him with chains, for none would hold him now. Instead, he was given a chamber with walls of stone, guarded by soldiers who watched him with wide eyes. Yet he did not pace, did not rage. He sat calmly waiting, as though the palace itself were his to command. One guard whispered to another, "Why doesn't he run? He could escape into the city." The other replied nervously, "Maybe he doesn't need to run. Maybe he knows the queen will call him again." They were right. That night, when the palace grew silent and the moons hung high, the queen summoned him in secret. The guards brought him to her private chamber where no noble eyes could see. She sat without her crown, her robes lighter, her face less a mask of steel and more a woman's face, though still sharp with pride. "You should be gone," she said. "I gave you your life. Why are you still here?" The human shrugged lightly, his calm eyes never leaving hers. "Because this isn't finished. You know it as well as I do." Her jaw tightened. "Do not think that surviving one trial makes you my equal." He leaned forward slightly, his words steady, unshaken. "I don't need to be your equal. I just need to be myself, and that's something your court doesn't understand. They live in chains because they choose to." Her breath caught before she could stop it. His words cut deeper than they should have. For centuries she had forced obedience, but had she ever truly commanded loyalty? The storm outside began to rage, lightning flashing across the alien sky. The palace walls shook faintly with thunder. The queen turned to the window, watching the storm with narrowed eyes. "It is dangerous for you to stay," she said finally. "The nobles are restless. They whisper of rebellion already. They say I have gone weak. And they may be right." The human's voice was quiet but firm. "Then maybe it's time to show them strength isn't about chains. It's about choice." Her eyes snapped back to him, fury flaring. Yet beneath it, buried deep, was something she dared not admit. Fear. Not of him, but of the truth he carried. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the palace gates. The queen turned away, her face once again a mask of steel. "Leave me," she said coldly. Though her voice trembled just slightly, the human bowed his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, and walked out calmly. His footsteps echoed down the hall, steady and unbroken, like the beating of a war drum. Alone in her chamber, the queen pressed a trembling hand against her crown. For the first time in her reign, she felt the weight of it, heavy, uncertain. The storm outside was only beginning, and she knew it. Her empire was on the edge of rebellion. Her council doubted her. Her throne was trembling, and at the heart of it all stood one human who refused to bow. The palace was no longer a fortress of silence and loyalty. It had become a nest of whispers, sharp and dangerous. Every corridor carried rumors, every chamber echoed with doubt. The nobles who once bowed without question now spoke in hushed voices, their glowing eyes filled with suspicion. The human had done what no army ever could. He had cracked the foundation of the queen's rule. The queen sat in her war chamber, the map of her empire spread out before her. Tiny figures carved of crystal marked her fleets, her cities, her strongholds. For centuries it had all seemed unshakable. Now looking at it, she felt as though each piece might crumble into dust. Her crown pulsed faintly on her head, heavier than it had ever been. The doors burst open. One of her generals entered, bowing sharply but speaking without hesitation. "My queen, the nobles gather their forces. They claim you have betrayed tradition by sparing the human. Some call for your removal." The queen's eyes narrowed. "And you? Do you doubt me too?" The general hesitated. His silence spoke louder than words. He bowed lower to hide his trembling. She dismissed him coldly, but the truth sank like stone in her chest. Her empire was slipping away. Far from the council chamber, the human walked the palace corridors with calm steps. Guards followed at a distance, but none dared to touch him. He carried no weapon, yet his presence was heavier than steel. Everywhere he went, servants and soldiers stared, some with fear, some with awe. One young guard whispered as he passed, "That's him, the one who tore the contract, the one who survived the trial." Another replied, "If even he can stand against the Queen, maybe we can too." The human said nothing, but he heard every word. His defiance was spreading like fire through dry grass. That night the storm broke. The nobles, furious and desperate, rose in open rebellion. Armed soldiers stormed the palace gates, banners of the old law raised high. Their voices roared, "Chains! Chains! Chains!" They demanded the Queen's crown, demanded the human's head, demanded the return of the world they had always known. The Queen stood upon her balcony, her golden eyes burning as she watched her own nobles turn their blades against her. The air shook with thunder, but the louder storm was the one below. Behind her, the human approached. His voice was calm even in the chaos. "This is what happens when you live by chains. They were always going to turn on you. All it took was someone to show them another way." The Queen turned sharply, fury flashing in her eyes. "You think this is victory? You think rebellion proves your point? They will tear everything apart." The human's gaze was steady, unbroken. "Maybe it needs to be torn apart before it can be rebuilt." She hated his words. She hated how they struck deeper than any blade. But when the palace gates shattered and the enemy stormed inside, she made her choice. "Fight with me," she said. "If you truly believe in freedom, then prove it with your blood." The human nodded once. "Not for your throne, not for your crown, but for the chance to break their chains." The palace erupted in fire and steel. Rebellion clashed against loyalty, the sound of battle shaking the very foundations of the empire. The nobles screamed for her fall, but the Queen fought like a storm herself, her crown blazing with power. And at her side, the human fought with nothing but his will, turning their own weapons, their own rage against them. The soldiers saw it. The servants saw it. Even the rebels themselves saw it. Two figures side by side, one a queen of chains, the other a man of freedom, standing not as master and subject, but as equals. By dawn, the rebellion was broken. The nobles who had risen were defeated, their banners torn, their voices silenced. The palace stood battered but unbroken. The Queen stood upon the balcony again, her chest heaving, her crown dimmed from the battle. Below her, thousands of eyes looked up, not with fear as before, but with something she had never seen from her people. Hope. She turned to the human, her voice low. "You have changed everything." "Even I cannot deny it," he shook his head. "I didn't change anything, they did. All I did was show them that the chains could break." Her eyes lingered on him, filled with something she had once thought impossible for herself. Respect. Perhaps even something more dangerous. In the days that followed, whispers of rebellion faded into silence, replaced by a new kind of murmur. Stories of the human who had survived the trial, the man who had stood beside the Queen, the one who proved that freedom could not be bound by law or tradition. The nobles feared him. The people admired him, and the Queen sitting upon her throne could no longer see her crown as unshakable, for she knew the truth that her entire empire now whispered. The human had not just survived, he had left a legacy, and that legacy would outlive even the Queen's reign.